And that is one of the unique, wonderful things about humanity is we are creators. We are powerful creators. And sometimes we create our own distortions. And we've been doing that since the Paleolithic times. That's where we developed the us versus them mentality. That's where we developed the fear of the night, the fear of the unknown, all of these sort of things that hit the Paleolithic times. And humanity got really good and refined it like beautifully well, all of these distortions through the Middle Ages. It was just a horrific time. But over the years, over the centuries, that started to mellow out. People started to learn to heal those distortions, which is why we are living in the most peaceful and prosperous time in human history. And that is one of the unique, wonderful things about humanity is we are creators. We are powerful creators. And sometimes we create our own distortions. And we've been doing that since the Paleolithic times. That's where we developed the us versus them mentality. That's where we developed the fear of the night, the fear of the unknown, all of these sort of things that hit the Paleolithic times. And humanity got really good and refined it like beautifully well, all of these distortions through the Middle Ages. It was just a horrific time. But over the years, over the centuries, that started to mellow out. People started to learn to heal those distortions, which is why we are living in the most peaceful and prosperous time in human history.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Qing, and I have an incredible guest here today. I would definitely consider him a brother from another mother, Kaedrich Olsen, a
Hello.
paranormal phenomenon in of himself and a master of all things energetic and spiritual and spirit entity related. And, paranormal is a word that most people tend to take on this whole ominous sort of like adjective or definition, but he definitely brings an expression of so many different layers to that very definition. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to our audience. Welcome, friend.
Hey, thank you for having me. This is going to be great. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Yes. And I mean, I've spent many decades in the spiritual energetic space, and when I first saw your interview and had just an incredible connection, because you have a great understanding of this stuff that unless you experience it, it's almost impossible to define. And that's where so many people end up either on your doorstep or mine looking for answers. And when you were so poetic, it was so elegant, just the way that you would describe these experiences and your deep understanding of it, and your decades of experiencing your connection with the spirit world. I was just blown away. So I was just really excited that you were able to share your time with us today. And please share with the audience more on the history and nature of yourself and what you do.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I literally grew up doing this stuff. I grew up in a house that was haunted by all means. You could see TV channels changing the dial, physically changing the dial, radios would turn on, music boxes, of all things, music boxes, multiple music boxes would go off at once. You'd hear footsteps going up and down the hallway. And so I grew up literally around this. My parents took me to a spiritualist church, which is like your typical Protestant church, but it has trance mediumship at the end of it. So there's like 1 to 3 channelers come up at the end of the stage, or up to the stage, and they're channeling all kinds of spirits. Every Saturday night in the church basement, there was a seance. So I literally grew up doing this. My parents had a veritable library of books in their basement, which is where my room was. So I could read everything from the encyclopedias to, I don't know if you remember the old Gavin and Your Frost books on magic. I picked up on those, to Raymond Buckland's Big Blue, which I still recommend for people to reading that one, and Secret Teachings of All Ages. So I've been steeped in this since as long as I could remember. And that's what I've been doing for these past many years, is teaching people who are seeking to connect with something that's more, to learn more about what is on the other side of the veil. But even though there's no veil, they're trying to connect with more. And I teach people how to do that, as well as you get the blocks out of the way so that they can do it effectively and in a way that's not frightening.
Wow. Wow. Would you say that your parents' approach to how they embraced your experience of the nature of your connection with the spirit world made it so much easier for you to continue this journey?
Absolutely. My parents were totally open to it. In my early days of exploring like magic, I used to make my own incenses as a kid. Teenager, let's be fair, teenager. And my
Wow.
mom would have no problem running to the local metaphysical bookstore that was like near her work. So she'd
Wow.
pick up the herbs for me, bring it home. She would introduce me to people in the local community. There was, a burgeoning Wicca coven at that time. And I realized it wasn't my path after being there a couple of times, but she introduced me to the people that were there. She took me to psychic development classes as a kid, and we had discussions all the time about the spiritual nature of things and connecting with it. So, yeah, my parents were super open to it. They let me explore and connected me where I needed to connect. And even to this day, even though my mom died a year ago in December, she still reaches out. She still connects. She's still a big part of my ability to connect and helping people. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow. It's interesting, when you and I talk about magic, I mean, I teach people sort of internal sort of like alchemy practices from my lineage as a Taoist priest, having done it for about 30 years now. That is a whole like little ecosystem of these different ways to access consciousness and validate it through your own cultivation. And then when we talk about magic, so many people go to the page of David Blaine. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so and even there, I would definitely be question how much of that stuff he's doing that is also a level of sensory perception that is not just all just smoke and mirrors. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Those are very valid things there, because a lot of times people expect magic to be bibbity bobbity boop, Harry Potter, wave a wand, and things instantly appear. Where the way I try to convey it to people is time is the medium for which magic occurs. So, what you visualize, what you experience, what you create internally, your internal world, is reflected in the external world. And the external world still has to mostly follow Newtonian and Einsteinian laws. It still has to follow the laws of the physical world. But that moment that you created catches up to you, and that's what magic is. As long as you don't get in the way, as long as you don't mess it up, you're visualizing making $100, but then you start going, well, really, I shouldn't get $100 because whatever. Then you make $10 instead. But that even then is manifesting with a shadow, and the shadow side can manifest beautifully. And that's where I try to emphasize to people the difference between what I've learned to call operant magic versus transcendent magic.
Okay.
Operant magic is where you light the candle, you got the incense, you got the herbs, sachets, whatever you're doing, you've got the incantations, and you're in the ritual chamber doing the magic work. That's operant magic. Transcendent magic is where you work on your inner world. You connect with your own sense of authenticity. You become the living embodiment of your own higher being. And that which is already attuned to you, those things that are already in alignment with your authentic nature, just automatically show up through synchronicity. You don't have to really put effort. There's some effort, but you don't have to really put effort into it. It's just like suddenly the right person's in your life. You get the right opportunity for the right job. You get the right car. And you're like, wow, where's this coming from? Well, it's coming from you because you're doing your inner work, and your inner work is becoming reflected in the world around you. And I've even got practices with runes to do that, because runes have been a big part of my lessons and my teachings.
Interesting. It's sort of almost parallel to understanding the nature of Taoism in the sense we call it wu wei, effortless action. And you become the magnet of your reality, and how you access what we call this magnetic fluidity is the 0 point energy that you would refine as the glue that is the construct of like quantum physics as you would perceive it. But, a lot of people, I had a student that's a doctor of functional medicine, and he's like, his son has a PhD from a UCSF and was studying one of the things that he was studying was the nucleus of a cell, right? And he goes, oh, you wouldn't believe what I found in there. And like, San Qing has been teaching me this for years. What is it? Black hole energy. Black hole energy right in the sun. And he freaked out. He goes, this is real. I'm like, I've been teaching you this. And understanding the nature of that access of the black hole energy. From a Taoist perspective, you access it through the middle dantian, the fourth chakra, your heart center, however you want to reclaim it. And it's sort of like a cycle of, it's a ritual where the death of a star, the rising of the red phoenix, and the expression of the black hole energy in of itself. So there's sort of like a process to it, but it's like, my goodness, there is nothing more powerful than sitting into the incantation, sitting into the magical ritual, and everything you speak on has such a resonance and frequency and pulpability from what you're saying. I'm really grateful that you're sharing this with me and the audience, because it's really powerful stuff. And, it comes out in the expression of what's happening in your reality. Because the most important thing for anyone, especially a human being, is to be able to validate and confirm what's happening is real.
Absolutely. And that is one of the things that I've learned over the years. I really got into this through Norse mysticism and runes. And then I had like this mindset, oh, there's a certain specific way that you do this, because, that's the way all neophytes are, right? There's a certain way you do this. And you get to the adept stage, and you're like, well, yes, of course, here's the tradition and here's why we do that. But then I think when you finally get to, the words are escaping, when you finally get to like this place of mastery, you're like, man, however you do it, however you get there is fine. Because all that really matters are results. You could have a very traditional practice that's been going on for thousands of years and get great results, or you could take what you've learned, put it together in something that's new. You bring something new to the world and you get results. Both are valid.
What would you say, having done this for so many decades and teaching people and mastering your own skill, what my observation is, you access this consciousness and this energy, and it's a progressive thing until it's not. And then all of a sudden, it's literally what you were speaking of. It's like, okay, there's a ritual, or I've mastered this and cultivated this so much that it becomes instantaneous. It's like there's no longer the processes that we go through to go, oh, well, this ritual would be pertinent to this, or this would be pertinent to that. I can literally think it and it becomes realized, that type of thing.
Correct. That is why one time, several years ago, somebody asked me what I thought the most important tool in magic was. And I just flat out said psychology. Even if you're doing a group ritual, you need to understand the psychodrama and the implications of using the tools and the incantations and getting everybody into believing the story and following the story that we're doing. Even a ritual is a story that we can believe in. And then when you get outside of the ritual chamber, the ritual space, you can go back to not believing if you don't want to. That's fine. But like you said, sometimes my best work is done by just taking a walk and thinking about it, because I realized over the years what's going on, whether you're doing an elaborate ceremonial magic ritual that takes hours to get through it, or you're doing a folk ritual where you just kind of slap things together and say, hey, let's do this, or you're taking a walk. What's really going on is your consciousness is affecting the other layers of consciousness throughout the universe, source energy, whatever you want to call it. You're getting attuned to it, you're getting aligned to it, you're putting pieces and parts into place, and then you're just letting it go and letting things happen how they just happen naturally after you get in tune with it. So this is why I tell people all the time, my version of understanding what runes are just subtle layers of consciousness connected to the subtle layers of the universe, and all we're doing is just acting as an intermediary between, tying the pieces and parts together and creating with our own belief, with our own understanding, our own will, our own consciousness.
That is just beautiful, my friend. And it comes out in that expression. When you cultivate this stuff, what I find is I it becomes um, it becomes so tangible. Like most of the stuff I teach would be, let's sort of compartmentalize things in the sense of what is sensory perception in definition. It might be psychic capabilities, mediumship, channeling. Where is it that you want to stand on that spectrum of a depth of realizing, a depth of accessing this higher state, and how do you acquire these skills? So, for me, it's like, okay, you break the ice with someone, you do a psychic reading on them, you give them their mental, emotional, and physical state, and then they go, WTF, how is that possible? And then it's like, well, we're operating in all dimensions at once. And that's like, hang on a second, that's not what I was told. It was a conceptual thing where your attention can only focus on one dimension, so you can't operate in all of them. Well, this is sort of like the nature of what I've defined as imagination. So that literally is the seed of all things. If you can imagine it, you can create it. And that's how I've come to that realization through my own cultivation practices, the Taoist ones that are thousands of years old, and then realizing that if that is possible, it will be created by yourself, and then it will be validated through a confirmation of a 3D alteration, and that would, to me, be the validation. How does that resonate with you and how you approach it?
Absolutely. I totally agree. And the way that I approach it is I tend to talk to people about the prefrontal cortex of our
Okay.
brain.
Yeah.
That the prefrontal cortex is the thing that makes us uniquely human. No matter what kind of animal they are on the planet, whatever primate they are, great ape or cetacean, doesn't matter. They don't have the prefrontal cortex. Human beings do. And of course, the prefrontal cortex does higher executive functions of the brain, organizing information, but it can override emotional states. So, like when you go to see a horror movie and you get a jump scare and then you laugh, that's the prefrontal cortex telling you, hey, everything's okay, you're fine. The prefrontal cortex also assigns meaning and purpose to things that only make sense to you. It's your specific meaning, your specific purpose to everything. And the other cool thing that the prefrontal does is it can imagine situations. It can play out things beforehand in great detail as if you were doing it for real. And the subconscious part of the mind then takes that as reality because the subconscious doesn't know past, present, future, fantasy, or reality. And if your prefrontal cortex can create it, the subconscious mind believes it to be true. And now you're overriding the emotions and believing it. You're feeling confident about it. You're here, you're there, and you're sending out that energy to the universe because now you're conceptualizing it. And here's an interesting take on it. And I'm not saying this is exactly quantum physics, but we can use a quantum physics model as a metaphor for this, meaning the waveform collapse. When we observe a waveform, it collapses into a particle. And I've come to understand that our superpower as human beings is we observe reality into existence, basically. This follows up with Robert Lanza and his biocentrism theory that the universe exists simply because we observe it. Now, your prefrontal cortex is connected with your higher being, your astral self, your 5D consciousness, whatever you want to call it, your ascended master version of whoever you are. And that part of you does not exist in any sort of time or space. Time is not linear there. And if your prefrontal cortex is envisioning a situation in perfect detail, you are semi-collapsing that reality into actuality. And now all it has to happen is time to catch up to it so you can finish observing it into actual reality. But it all starts with your consciousness, your connection to consciousness. And I attribute that to the prefrontal cortex and its direct connection to higher being.
That's a beautiful observation, because helping people understand this, sort of like deconstructing some points of view so that it can be digestible. You have a very elegant way of being able to describe it, and people can absorb that information and realize it through your instruction, through your description, through the understanding that you've given someone, which, quite frankly, to most people, you just basically was able to describe, quantum physics in a way that someone could understand what in Tao's name that really is. Because most people do not have any clue, even when you start getting into the deeper layers of it, or just the idea of entanglement, that confuses people. That they find themselves kind of like, or moreover, I get a lot of people that are still on the Newtonian physics model of understanding. And, it really comes down to how you perceive it and what is being validated in your reality that would determine that you believe what it is. That's how I see it anyway.
Absolutely. Even if we want to go with Newtonian physics, when it comes to his laws of energy, the conservation of energy, or even more practical, thermodynamics, when we understand the Newtonian thermodynamics and we apply that to the energy work we're doing, how energy always moves from a greater concentration to a lesser, then we start to even can understand magic in that point of view using Newtonian physics.
Yeah. It's interesting. Let's talk more about when we're talking about like the paranormal stuff, because you're really, just for the audience, we have a real guru in here in relation to your connection with the spirit world and all the things that you've done in your career and where you are today, and your in-depth knowledge and understanding of paranormal activity and interaction. What would you say to, it was interesting because just earlier today I did my own personal podcast on this whole theory that if you're familiar with Robert Monroe.
Oh yeah, the Monroe Institute with the hemisync technology.
Yeah. So I was just speaking more on his perception when he enters other dimensions of this thing that he calls the loosh. Have you ever heard of this term before?
The ways I've heard of loosh, of course, is an absinthe when it turns from green to white. Love
Right.
absinthe. And loosh as the negative energy that we produce that is consumed by archons and other sort of negative entities.
And so he was sort of like describing that, and I kind of went into it because it could actually go in either way, really. It can be either positive or negative, and what do you do with that when you're expressing it in an emotion? It's very easy to transmute that energy. If in my space we call certain sort of personalities what we call as psychic vampires, right? That have their ability to sink their teeth into your energetic field, but it's absolutely determined by your perception. So if you're operating in a duality and you are fearful, you are their dinner in so many ways, and how you are able to use the word protect. I don't generally use that so much because when I walk into a healing or things of that nature, I become one with the universe, and nothing has title. So for me to be fearful of you would be being fearful of myself. But that's also, I say that with confidence and knowing, but there's also a degree of development that may take someone a few minutes. It may take someone a few hours. It may take someone a lifetime. It's determined by their own progression. But understanding the nature of what I'm saying, you can embody it from the words itself. But then it comes down to, can you actually apply it? And that's where it depends on where someone is at their own level of consciousness. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. Applying it is the tricky part. And I'm going to kind of take a sidestep here, but I'll come back to it, I promise. Because one of the things I've seen with a number of clients is they'll they're having some challenge with their spiritual connections, even with potential psychic vampires or other energy drains. And I asked them what kind of spiritual practices they're already doing. And they'll give me a list of books that they've read or that they've got in their collection. I'm great, but what are you doing? And they're like, well, I'm about ready to read this book and about ready to read that book. And I'm like, great, but what are your spiritual practices? And it comes down to it, they're not. They're just reading a book. And as we've heard so many times, the map is not the territory. You've got to do the practices. So I will have them stop and go back to a book that makes sense to them, that feels relevant to them, and do the practices in the book to see if it clicks, to see if it connects. Because I've seen people who may only have read a book or two, but they're doing the practices and they're doing them diligently because persistence is key. Being consistent is key to this. Whereas people who have read a billion books but never done anything are still floundering. So it does come to that awareness. And the only way you can develop that awareness is through the practice. Because no matter the book, no matter the teacher, no matter the lessons, it's just a doorway. It's just a map. And you're not going to get the experience until you go through that doorway, because we don't have the words to describe what you're going to experience. We don't have the words to convey what's going to happen when you're connecting. There's just no way. And it's unique to everybody. And so when you get that experience, you get that awareness. Now, when you have that awareness and you have that experience, you're suddenly aware that, oh, there's like this little blob of energy that's trying to poke me with fear energy or poke me with anger energy or something. And when I feel anger, I can feel that energy getting sucked out of me. Oh, hey, there's a thought form in the room. So now you got that experience. You got that awareness. You'll never get it until you experience that. And now that you're familiar with what energy drain feels like, you go to work and suddenly there's, that downer of a person that comes over and talks to you. And they're like, yeah, this thing sucks and that thing's terrible and that's awful. And you're feeling like this energy drain. You're like, oh, that's not me. That's them. Cool. And that's the approach I try to get people to go about. Instead of having that fear like, oh my God, it's a psychic ever, get away. It's like, oh, cool, I get what you're doing. And now that you're no longer triggered by their emotional state because you're aware of it and you're aware of your own emotional connection, you're like, okay, cool. Well, you go about your day, you have fun, you do your thing, and I'm over here, and it no longer bugs you. Whereas if you haven't done that inner work, you feel that entity in the room, you're aware of that entity in the room, it pokes you with fear. You're like, oh no, there's something here. And you're feeding it. I was like, time for some shadow work. Time to keep doing some deeper work so that you're no longer having this emotional reaction that is contributing to your energy getting zapped out of you and your power being taken away from you.
Wow. That's beautiful. It's sort of interesting when we talk about magic, and this is sort of like a little insight into how I frame some of the magic that I do. I don't necessarily go to the level of protection, but I just create architecture around whatever space I'm in or myself. And so it has a very fundamental structure where the inner workings work like like a rubber band. So it completely feeds off the intention of the place, person, or thing that is projecting or attempting to take from my field. And the effect is whatever they're doing, they receive it 10 times the effect. So it comes back to them. So this way, I'm not sitting there going, I'm going to conjure up this magical infrastructure that will, I want to destroy anyone that feels this way, does this thing. No, not at all. It all is predicated on whatever the intention of the person that is attempting to attack myself in relation to their mental, emotional, and physical state. And so this is then comes to the nature of like energy at a much deeper level. And most people tend to find this stuff rippling in its in the rebound effect of this stuff. And it's pretty dramatic. Over the years of all I do is it's like setting a little parameter and you just walk away, you forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't realize until your frequency continues to get higher. And there's like this massive divide as most people are operating in a duality that either people gravitate to you or they're repelled by you. There's like a very big difference, and it's due to your frequency and how they're perceiving their reality, that they're immersing themselves in this duality sort of like aspect. What are your thoughts on that? How would you approach it, or does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I like that structure approach because my intention of working with, like, say, psychic attack, for one of what better word for it, is you can't fight fire with fire, because if you do, you're just going to get a fire twice as big and it's going to burn your butt. But if you can understand what the fire is, that's that awareness. Like, ooh, what is this thing? What is it trying to do? What's going to benefit it? Why is it doing that? And then you hit it with water, and you put out that fire with water, or you create the barrier with water, then you're fighting in a completely different arena. This is kind of akin to something that I saw years ago when I lived in a bit of a community, and the house across from us had some people that weren't so nice all the time. You could always hear the yelling and fighting going on. And some friends of friends moved into that house that had a little bit of spiritual knowledge, a little bit of spiritual awareness. And when they moved in, they're going through the house with some sage and some drums, and they're like screaming, "Get out of here. We don't like you. Get out of here. Go away. Go away," with aggression. I'm like, you're contributing to that aggression energy there. That's not going to work. You got to shift that to the happy, calm, peaceful energy that you want in the house, and use that as a means to flood out the other energy. Another fun example of how this works is I was working with a client a while back. Was an old lady who moved into a little bit of a little house, a little duplex, and she was having some paranormal problems. The ick feeling, the uncomfortable sorts, even like almost like a voice in her head that was almost yelling at her, things moving. So she reached out to me for help. And as I'm exploring the house, because I found I can do that through Zoom, I can explore people's houses and tell them what's going on. I can even describe what their house looks like from Zoom. It's interesting. But I told her it felt like there's like a biker, like a rough and tumble biker, like a 1% biker in this house. And she's like, "Yep, that was a guy who was living here. He died before I moved in. He was, in a motorcycle club, and he was pretty brutal. He was loud music and yelling and all sorts of heavy drinking." And I'm like, gotcha. And he doesn't like what you did to the house, because she has lots of feminine stuff, lots of frilly, flowery stuff. He didn't like it at all. And he was very upset because this was his house. So what we did is we created a little portal in that room that resonated with his energy, that led to a place that would be, like loud music, motorcycles, people fighting and yelling, lots of drinking. And this lady's like, "That sounds like hell." And I'm like, "You're right. To you, that's hell. But to him, that's heaven. That's where he wants to go." So we opened up that portal. He didn't want to go. And so we started flooding the room with the feminine, frilly, flowery energy, just making it all nice and bright and happy. Instantly, he was gone. He's like, "Screw this. I'm out of here." And she hasn't had a problem since. And you see, that was something that worked for both of them. He got what he wanted, a place that he would love to be. She got a nice, quiet, peaceful home again.
And that's a beautiful way to approach it. You really did a great job of resolving the sort of like the dysfunction, because every time I come across an earthbound spirit that just wants to hang out and just be just a nuisance, there's a reason for it. It's either observing the outcome of the fruits of their labor or lack of, or attempting to right a wrong, or perhaps maybe continue to move forward whatever their intention was when they had a physical body in one way, shape, or form, through transmitting through the people that are in the space that they're occupying. And that's what a lot of people don't seem to understand. When I share with them, all thoughts of your mind are not yours, they're like, "Whoa, what do you mean by that?" I'm like, most of these energies will operate in a lower frequency that you will not know the difference between something you perceive as a great idea that you had and what their intention of how they're going to direct your behavior. Have you come across that yourself?
All the time. Because
Yeah.
if you don't know your mind, you don't know thyself. If you don't know your mind, if you don't know the way you feel, you don't know the way you're processing energy, when you're receiving information from an external source, you don't know it's an external source. My guides, my teachers, whispers, I call them, have really let me know that 90% of our thoughts are not our own. They never have been. They come from energy wells that we move through. They come from different egregores and tulpas that are all around us, servitors that are all around us all the time, thought forms, guides and teachers that are trying to help us, whispering little thoughts into us, or even little negative, low level entities that want us to do things for their benefit. And if you are not aware, if you cannot discern where that information is coming from and what it's doing, you think it's all your thought. And this sometimes means some people that are decent people believe they're bad people because they have some negative, repetitive thoughts and they think they're an awful person. And it's like, no, let's clear this attachment, get it out of the way, do some internal working at the same time, because you have to do both. You have to clear the entity and you have to do the internal processing. But when you get through that, you're like suddenly going, oh, I'm not a bad person. I'm not the one having all these negative thoughts. It was just this thing messing with me for a long time. And now I can shift out of that energy state and, oh, so much better.
That's a beautiful way to look at it, especially because I mean, for all the audience, in the way that I process things, the things that I was trained in, that's literally an exorcism in your own form, right? How you've helped resolve whatever that entity's purpose or mission was, resolve that, heal it, and then have it go on its merry way. I've yet to ever come across an energy that doesn't want to have some resolution, maybe one in 30 years, but they all, if you give them what they want, and from my personal experience, it always ends up being love to some degree. It's an acceptance, an opening, and they just like they literally go, "Thank you, I'm good, I'm gone. Thank you, we're done here." And that's, to me, is a real interesting thing. Once again, I could go years without even coming across a lower frequency energy that
Mm-hmm.
would transmute into an apparition or something that looks ominous, or have this sort of like underpinnings of what people perceive in Hollywood movies, and that's generally a construct of their reality. And so when people are like, "Oh, so what does that mean? Is Freddy Krueger real?" And I'm, yes. It's a construct of Wes Craven's deep, dark seated parts of his mind that have transmuted this frequency. So is it something that you could go out and put your hands on? It depends on how much you want to feed into that energy and the construct of it and how he's generated it. But let's just measure it by the sense of, there was a movie made, there were 6 movies made, there are millions of people that invest in that energy on a daily basis. So it is present, it is real, and it can have an effect on you if you choose to allow it. It's as tangible as the day is long, and that all has to do with your perception of reality. How do you normally see it yourself, or is that a similar viewpoint? Or
Yep,
tell us
yep.
more about how you look at it.
There's a couple pieces to that. This is where I love some of the work of like Grant Morrison when he talks about hyper sigils, because he knows about sigils and sigil work. But being a comic book artist and his comics have been made into movies, he purposefully creates characters and situations that are sigils. That when the readers and the viewers watch these things and read it, they're all investing their energy into that sigil and bringing that magic, that energy to life in a collective way. So it's fascinating that he works in that way. And when I've worked with people, with clients who have had negative paranormal problems going on, with very rare exceptions, and those exceptions have always been nature spirits, some sort of an natural spirit of the world or house spirit, but all of those paranormal problems have been their own creation. And it usually starts with really something's in the house. It could be grandma coming by to say hi, but because the movies, their only exposure to the paranormal has been the movies. And the only thing they see in the movies, if there's a ghost in the house, well, then it's a demonic presence. That gets reinforced, let's say, by the churches or by the documentary TV shows or the paranormal investigator TV shows that tell you that if there's a spiritual presence in your house, well, it's demonic and it's after your soul and it means harm to you and your children. And they're
That's kind of,
believing that. Go
well,
ahead.
no, I meant to just say that, that really gives you and I a bad name in that sense of the word, that they really start pushing that rhetoric and people start believing it. It gets
Yep.
transmitted through a media a mouthpiece, and I've found that all these types of personalities that have these shows, ghost hunters, whatever you want to call them, they all have the same thing in common. They don't believe any of it.
It's true.
I know, and that's the only reason. That's the only reason they continue entertaining what you and I would say. I don't want to define it as this, but it's kind of nonsensical, the behavior that they're conducting. Then the reason that they don't believe it is the only reason they continue doing it, because the second that their fear sets in and they do have a realization of what they're really playing with, they're going to stop.
Right.
Because those type of energies feed so much from the fear-based construct of the individual, and all they need, it's just like opening the doorway to the old Hollywood, open the door to the vampire and invite them in. That's exactly the same thing that goes on here. The second and I mean, this is sort of funny. I would love to hear your thoughts. So a lot of people come to me, they're like, well, what does that mean? Is God really, what happens? Why did God give me this bad luck? Like, how can you justify, rapists, murderers, serial killers? How do you justify that? And I'm like, listen, there are many different cycles of consciousness that are taking place right now in all dimensions. Instantly, we're all experiencing all these things at once, right? Now, I need you to understand something. How does someone like a Hitler do the types of heinous things that he committed in his lifetime in history, and then all of a sudden fall prey? How does it happen? The fall of his empire started when he stopped believing in his own rhetoric. And so that's that epicenter, all it is a little crack. And so these megalomaniacs and these serial killers, murderers, whatever, they are living with their belief system, and oh, well, they don't, it seems like people can do anything and nothing happens to them because they believe it. You need to understand the power of your own intention and what you know to be true. And what happens is they believe it to an extent, and then of course they're telling themselves what they want to hear, and in the background there's this little seed of what they've perceived as karma, seed of what they perceive or know to be an emotion of fear, and then it all unravels. And then you're like, see, the karma model worked very well. This person got exactly what they deserved because they stopped believing their own madness, their own truth, as you would say. What are your thoughts on that sort of aspect?
Ultimately, everything, and it took me a while to come to this acceptance, everything is source energy. What the Kabbalion, the Hermeticists call the all, and everything is mental. It's all mind. It's all consciousness energy everywhere. And that consciousness energy condenses into spiritual energy, to physical form, to light, everything that we know. Everything is consciousness, no matter what. And along the way, that energy can get distorted. Just like you can have a nice, clean sounding bell, you can still run that bell through an amplifier and then kick in the distortion pedal, like use for heavy metal guitars, and you can distort that sound. It can get just out of phase. You can get out of tune even. Now, granted, there are ups and downs. Yes, there are going to be ups and downs. And right now there's some, conflicts going on in the world, but we are still in the most peaceful time by far in human history because we're healing those distortions. We created those distortions out of source energy. And so I think when we ask, how can God allow this if God is all love and peace and wonderful, I don't think that's the right question. I
Well,
think that is a very limited understanding of what
yes.
deity is. That's people putting deity in a box and saying that this deity has to conform to my standards and my ethics and my morals. And if this deity is not operating inside this little box, then what's wrong with the world? Nothing's wrong with the world. And I tell this to people all the time. Despite the wars, despite the crime, despite the conflicts, despite the distortions, there's nothing wrong with the world. The world's always been this way. It's getting better. But it's people like you in the world, people like my clients that are in the world, like me, if I can go so far to say that. When we look at the world, we say, hey, there's something wrong here. Well, no, the world's always been that way. What's different is us, because we've learned to heal those distortions, or we came from star seeds or ascended masters or whatever. We're here because we don't have that level of distortion, and we're not burdened by it. In some ways we are. I do have to, as a shadow worker, I do consider myself a shadow worker. I do have to live in a little bit of duality so I can understand where my clients are coming from. I do have to understand what their feeling is of separation from source so that I can communicate it to them. So I purposefully live in a slight duality just so I can experience that. And I think that's what makes us brilliantly beautiful as human creators, is we can create those distortions and then we can heal them. Just like as you were saying, we believe the story, so we're distorted. Now we stop those beliefs and we start healing those distortions. We go, oh, okay, cool. And I do believe, and I have to use the word believe here instead of know, I do believe that sometimes, not all the time, but most of the time, those are conscious choices we make in the before life. Before we incarnate, we say, this lifetime, I'm going to come in as a jerk. I'm going to be a total butt plug. I don't know what we're going to use. I'm going to just be a complete asshole in this life just so I can have that experience. And then they go, okay, I created that distortion. Now the lifetime's over. I did it. Cool. Let's heal that distortion. Because what if that's part of the agreement, is to be the jerk, have the distortion, heal that distortion. So now they can help other people heal their distortions too. So I look at it all of these various ways. And I don't know, this is crazy. In a weird sense, it's beautiful to see those distortions, but I'm a shadow worker. And so that's how I look at things now. It's beautiful to see those distortions because of the lessons that they give us, the contrast that it gives us, so that we can better understand ourselves. We can be more discerning. We could even finally say, no, I don't want to be like that. No, those are the things that need to stop in the world. And we wouldn't know that without the contrast that gives us that ability, that energetic push to ascend even better and make the world a more peaceful, prosperous, and more beautiful place for everybody.
That's a beautiful observation. It's very much in line with how I see the reality and the nature of reality right now. Now, let's talk more about your communication with the spirit world. Do you channel your teachers, or do you generally stay in a mediumship level where you're communicating with them, but you're not necessarily absorbing the pure essence of them per se? How would you define how you?
All of the above happens. Like when I'm with clients, I ask for their guides and my guides. And they're quite often, I'm having three conversations at once. I'm talking with my client back and forth. Their guides are coming in and giving some insight to what's going on, but my guides have to interpret it and explain it to me in my terms and my understanding. So I'm like having this three-way conversation. It's all external, but it's happening there. But then there are times where my guides, the whispers, are talking to me, and I'm just internalizing this information. I'm just bringing it in, and it's like gnosis. It's a complete Gnostic reception. Nowadays, we use the term download. It's just complete download, unpacks. I'm like, whoa, okay, here's something new I get to test and practice. And there are other times where I'm with a client, where I'm whatever's going on, and blah, they're coming through me, and then the client goes, well, what was that you just said a minute ago? And I'm like,
I don't know.
no, I wasn't here.
I love it. I love it, brother, because that's really what happens. A lot of people, I channel my teachers. I have like over 170 teachers just within the Taoist lineage. It's just basically like, which book do I want information from? Let me look at this book. And of course, I'll call on that teacher that'll just give me the direct source information for whatever it is that I'm looking for. Generally speaking, I normally channel Lao Tzu, who was basically the transcribe the direct information, the whispers of the universe to him, translated within the Tao Te Ching, is what most people relate to Taoism today. So he's pretty much like present with me 24/7. So, I see him as clearly as I see you, have conversations with him, and it's a sensory perception. It's a palpability. And when I draw him in to myself and I'm doing a channeling healing or just an experience where someone wants to interact with him firsthand, it's like it just expands the area, just burns the heat up. The heat is, I feel like I'm in a sauna for a couple of hours. There's so much juice coming through. And then of course, whoever's experiencing the transmission also receives all these other elements, not just asking him direct questions, but the healing in of itself, because he's altering the energy as we speak. And whether it's 100 people, 10 people, 1,000 people, the frequency continues to rise, because normally I'd create the construct of the magic before we conduct the transmission, where whenever someone enters the space, they connect to the field. So it just keeps going up and up and up and up. And people are just like, whoa, all I needed to do was be present and then inhale and exhale. And then I'm just getting this juice, this tremendous amount of energy. Well, that's just how I frame the magic as it stands. And so, oh my goodness, I need to talk to you about this. So just 2 days ago, I had this communication with a character by the name of Thoth. Have you ever heard of this guy?
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Not exactly the way that I would want to perceive the interaction. And then there was a very direct, he was basically saying, I'm not Hermes, which I found really interesting. Now, do not connect that energy. It is completely separate. And then the interesting part with this interaction was, I had this gentleman on my podcast and we were interacting. Thoth came in, who was mentoring him, and he was shape shifting before me in and out of his field, changing the whole appearance of the guy that I was interviewing. And then out of left field, Thoth came in with, understand that when you communicate and you delve into the emerald tablets, that this is a state that I access your mind, body, and spirit through your unconscious. And that this deeper messaging, if you don't understand the messaging of this particular scripture, don't go near it, because this has an effect. And I was like, what? And then he tells me that this guy has this power to put people in a somnambulistic state just by looking at them. And it's like, so, and he was like, well, what's that? It's like, well, you hypnotize people. And then Thoth goes, everyone that reads it will be hypnotized and added to the collective, because I'm drawing from that energy. I was like, okay, wow, this is getting a little intense. And then I go through this interaction. Finally, he says, make sure you separate the two. This guy's one of the energies, and who he was a reincarnation of, was Hermes. And he came into his field. And I'm looking at him going, okay, this, I can't make this stuff up, as I always get very excited when I'm witnessing this stuff, because the one of the reasons why I find it so easy to do this, and I've been doing this for a long time, is because I don't get attached to the outcome. I'm not looking for an approval or a validation of what the information is. I just share it and I show it. And that connection of energy is a validation for the individual. They're like, I may not be able to see this thing, but I can feel it in every realm right now. And I'm like, this Thoth character of energy, I'm not exactly sure whether I'm a fan of that energy or not, because the transmission and his direct messaging was, be mindful of these emerald tablets. And if you choose to be a part of the collective, I am sourcing my energy from the collective that is hypnotized by reading them. I was like, okay, Interesting. Then there was this golden disc that's about this thick, and it has 18 circles around it, all, and it was in solid gold, and all different like images, I don't know what you call it, symbols, numbers, whatever. And these discs are spinning around him at all times. And he says, every time someone goes to the tablets, I disperse 3 of these discs that instantly command their body, mind, and spirit. I'm like, okay, whoa. And this guy was he was like, well, that makes a lot of sense from everything that I've studied of these emerald tablets. And I'm like, why are you studying the emerald tablets? I'm kind of confused. That doesn't sort of resonate with me in relation to this guy is absolutely telling you, if you read this stuff, you're going to be hypnotized and part of the collective. And I was like, that doesn't sound like a great idea. I don't know. Just a thought there. And so when in that, the bigger thing was, the thing that blew my mind was like, okay, I don't even really know who Thoth is. So then I go researching Thoth, and this guy's the granddaddy, the OG of hypnosis and all this stuff. And I'm like, you can't make this stuff up. And that was where, and he didn't even understand that, but he realized that he had one of his clairvoyant friends that was telling him that he had these skills to hypnotize people. And then when it was triply validated through Thoth's transmission and direct communication, which it didn't make sense. He's mentoring this guy, but he's also a reincarnation of Hermes. That's a weird one, but he resonated with that. And he goes, that's so deep that I have to digest that for a couple of days. I don't even know what to say with that. But the volume of energy, as you can sample it, was very dense. You know what I mean? I mean, you can sample it right now. Holy moly. Thoth's presence, and then Hermes' presence, 2 different things, but why mentor? There's funny because there's a guy right now that speaks on the Emerald Tablets all the time, very big celebrity. I'm not going to mention names. You probably can use your own conclusion. He's actually a reincarnation of a rival of Thoth's.
Interesting.
And so he doesn't realize that. He's going around preaching the word of Thoth. Oh, this guy's great. This is everything. But Thoth is not really that pleased with all the information that he's putting out on the Emerald Tablets. And the guy attempted to, in so many words, discredit him over thousands of years ago and basically take over his reign and control. But he failed. He was an alchemist that was not to the same magnitude or power that Thoth had, but he's a reincarnation of it. And now he's spreading the word. So he's literally using this guy as a mouthpiece to hypnotize more people and bring them into the fold and continue the process, which is you know what the message was? Complete world domination. Now, that's the thing that I find really conflicting when you just sort of research this guy's supposed to be a transmission of God, Jesus. I don't know. So many people have different variables of what this guy's supposed to be, a wise, a thought projector of that type of nature. But that's not the energy that was transmitting. That's not the message that was transmitting. And it resonated with this guy that this validated a lot of the things that he was studying within the Emerald Tablets. I mean, it blows my mind. What are your thoughts on this?
I have to admit, I don't know. There's a lot of pieces and parts on that. Things I have to. Boy,
it's crazy, brother. It is like you can the good thing is with your skill set, you can sample those energies, the transmissions, and you can then go back to and reflect on it, do your own sort of like parts and piecing together. But from face value, which is where I take all this stuff, and that's why it's so easy for me to channel and transmit this information, because I don't get invested in it. I don't have an emotional outcome. I'm not looking to get validated by someone saying, "Wow, you're such an incredible channeler. Oh my goodness, what a fantastic information." It's when you watch the outcome of the individual freak out that, how did you know this information is coming through? And that's when I get excited. And then I'll go and do a little research for myself. And then I realize this guy's the granddaddy of hypnosis. And then I go, you can't make this stuff up. It was wild.
Always look for synchronicities. Always look for those little pieces and parts that fall into place. But when it comes to messages of like world domination or other things, the part that I want to think that comes to mind is all of these communications, no matter what they are, no matter who they're from, is a co-created experience with us. Like when I receive information from whisperers, I have to interpret it with information I already know and what I already understand and what my own emotional state is, what my own cognitive consciousness state is. And then that becomes a transmission through me as a co-creative thing. So I will never, ever discount who the messenger is, because they are an active part of the process. It's like spiritual telephone game. The spirits say one thing, we receive it, we tell a third thing, and who knows how accurate that is.
The biggest thing was it was part of the collective of what is the frequency that's present right now. And so what I find really interesting with that is I spent 30 years channeling like my teachers, Latsu, exposure to spirit entities in the thousands over the years. And I've never come across aliens. And in the last month, I have literally come across a dozen. And that just doesn't, it's just not part of what I would perceive as something that I was even looking for. I didn't throw my reel out to go, I want to communicate with that type of energy, but they're here and they are continually transforming and transmuting through individuals. And a dozen in a couple of weeks, as we've spoken before, there are no coincidences. And it's getting pretty on a regular basis. And
Absolutely.
I'm like, whoa. And so, all this stuff. And I find it interesting because I just describe it and people are like, oh my goodness, that's the alien from blah, blah. I don't go that far. I go, look, here's this image. This is this entity. I'm not really that. It doesn't really get me all warm and fuzzy inside. I'm not right. I'm like, so I'll describe the alien and then how it looks, the color of its skin, all that kind of stuff. And then they start going into, this is from the Pleiadians, from a certain star system that's a Stargate galaxy far, far away. And I'm like, wow, that's super cool. I mean, I almost want to just sort of like maybe understand it a little bit more because it's continually coming up, and these energies are just coming in, and they're speaking information, and it's like it's not going away. It's becoming more consistent. I don't know what's your observation. What have you noticed?
Oh yeah, when I work with guides, I work with my clients' guides all the time, and a lot of times there are extraterrestrial beings in there. And I will say the Andromedans have been popping up an unusual amount of times. The tall, lanky, blue-skinned, big eyes, they're showing up like crazy with people.
That was the one that I picked up just yesterday. And it was funny because this particular energy was coming through and it had a horde of and it wasn't just, the funny part was it transmuted through this particular person, and he was shape-shifting into this alien was coming out from his field, and it had 9 eyes, huge eyes, 9 on the forehead, very lanky, very long, blue skin, dark blue skin. And I was like, whoa. And then all of a sudden it had a bunch of minions, 20 or 30 minions around them that were all like gray. They were gray color, and they were maybe a couple of feet tall. And I'm like, and so he had this what was equivalent to vertigo. And so I did a healing on him as I'm communicating with these energies that were basically commandeering him, right? And so his guides came in, and I was watching these angelic wings sort of like sprout out from his upper, what we call the upper dantian, his upper head. These wings were sprouting out and literally engulfing his physical body and pushing this energy aside, this particular, alien. And they're like, hey, we can all have a conversation. Let's sit around the table, but you're not going to force yourself upon him at this particular juncture. And so then I did a really quick regulating of his energy centers, and his vertigo disappeared. And he was like, oh, thank you, brother.
Perfect.
Wow. But it was more the fact that these aliens were coming in. They were like, I come to speak to you. And it's like, do you want to speak to him or kill him? Because he's having an episode that like would be equivalent, like, because it was such a magnitude of energy. Now, if you were cultivating that for having a specific like conscious awakening, that's one thing. But he was not consciously cultivating anything. He literally had equivalent to vertigo like this, and they just came right through. And it was like, whoa, this is like, because a lot of people, and you can speak on this, and what I tell people is, if you don't have a better understanding, or you don't know yourself or myself to get the reference points, a lot of these paranormal in exchanges and activities in the spirit world will be perceived as some type of physical sort of like WebMD extraordinaire. Do you know what I mean? Like, you could sit there and start typing in, I'm having this episode, I'm feeling this, I think it's a psychotic episode, I'm having tingling of my hands. These are all part of the experience of the frequency change in your physical body, transmuting to higher dimensions, and all this energy is rushing in, and people would perceive it as like, I'm literally dying right now. Do I have diabetes? I'm having a stroke. And this sort of transmutes in a physical form. Does that make any sense to you?
Yep. Those are folks that are being called to do their spiritual work to better learn how to move energy. And when I have people that are experiencing things like that, I usually teach them microcosmic orbit to help.
And you know where that comes from, right?
Yep, I sure do. Qigong.
Taoist. That's
Dallas.
right. One of the traditional Taoist sort of practices. I've yet to find one that's the real secret source. Like, it's never really been revealed here in the Western reality. But I'll be interested to see the one that you cultivate, and then I can add some of the little, because Taoism is very much part of like the Chinese culture is this. If we say left, we mean right. If we say up, we mean down. If we say 3 steps forward, it's 4 steps back and 2 to the side. So when people take this stuff, like, for example, the first time microcosmic orbit was released to the Western world, there was a guy by the name of Mantak Chia. Have you ever heard of this guy?
Mantak Chia. Yep, I'm familiar with it.
So Mantak Chia has a very interesting reputation in China and in a lot of the monasteries, because he took quite a few secret source practices, took them, and then released them to the Western world, not with, when he was given it, it wasn't with that intention. And so there are pieces that are missing. And of course, these celestial masters and the guys that they get the information from were not stupid. They knew before they even handed him these tools that we're not going to give you the secret source. I specifically remember one time at my monastery, the living celestial master at the time was walking down a hallway, and he was in front of a stage of priests who were all getting ordained, and he got up on a podium, and he was like 92, 93 years old, and he tripped off the podium, and he was going face first to the ground. One of the priests reached out and grabbed him, and he got back up and he dusted off, and the words out of his mouth were, "Thank you, Tao." And then he just walked off. There's that sense of knowing and understanding. And it wasn't oh, thank you, student X, blah, blah, blah. It was my realization and knowing of this higher frequency, of this realization of all things as one. And so I'd be really interested at some point, whenever we get together again, and we can go over it, because that is a very, very powerful practice, extremely powerful to regulate and to activate the energy centers. And then moreover, just basically activate the universe inside you.
Yes.
That's what they call it, the microcosmic orbit. But we have one called the infinite Wuji body, which sort of polarizes any sort of like sort of like sacred secretion practice that may be equivalent to Christ oil or Christ consciousness or Kundalini.
Mm-hmm.
This Wuji body will activate equivalent to that, which is what we call the sacred infinite flower. And
Mm-hmm.
when you turn that on, it's like all bets are off. You don't need to ever leave home again. And the fun factory is going on right between here 24/7.
I love it.
So this is interesting. So with the aliens and then the practice, it's so interesting that you brought up a microcosmic orbit. It's just a favorite of yours, or how did you
Yep.
come across that?
Yep. By the way, I have to say we have to come to a close here pretty quick because of
Yes, yeah,
a little
sure, sure.
time. But yeah, I've learned the microcosmic orbit through a couple of different sources. Definitely one of them was Montauk Chia, so I'm curious to learn more about that.
Yeah,
And I've modified it a little bit in a way that makes more sense to me in the Norse tradition by using the Ingu's rune, which is a rune about masculine fertility, about potency, about the seed, all of that sort of thing. And so like it's like Ingus as I do that flow. So I've got some interesting practices that I do with that.
oh, that'd be awesome. I would love to connect with you again and have you back, or just privately have a conversation and share some secret sauce. And I constantly live the expression of the student is the teacher is the student. And
Absolutely.
if you embrace that reality, you're always shifting your consciousness.
Yep, I'm always learning because I used to think that I was motivated by curiosity, but I'm really motivated by an ever widening chasm of ignorance. The more I learn, the bigger that chasm gets. So I'm chasing what I don't know all the time.
Wow. I'm just gonna hang on a second.
Mhm.
There we go. Wow. Well, I can't thank you enough, brother, for spending your time with us today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I loved our discussion, and I look forward to more.
Yeah, definitely. Where can the audience actually? Last question. What is your thoughts on the nature of consciousness?
Oh, I wish I could have an easy answer for that, but everything is consciousness. That everything from a rock to a galaxy to especially the space between stars, that that greater than infinite potential that exists before light. It's just everything everywhere all the time. It's sort of like an electromagnetic field that consciousness is everywhere, but what we experience as consciousness is perturbations in the field, and they can be so complex. They can be super simple, like a thought form as a single emotion or a single thought, or they could be super complex, just like a great musical score. Looking at the waveform of like sound for a musical score, it could be very simple, could be very complex, but it's all just variations on the same theme in a sense.
Wow. And any last share with the audience what you're doing, or
Mhm.
what you're currently involved with. Where can people find you? I'm going to put all your social, all your information at the bottom of this podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, my website, Kaedrich.com, and I'm also currently teachable.kaedrich.com for online courses. But you can find me Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. I need to get caught up on YouTube again. And I'm currently putting out an 8-week shadow course that teaches you how to reach that ascended state of consciousness by pulling yourself out of the collective shadows of the physical world, the anger, the fear, the jealousy, all of the stuff that we heap onto each other, telling us that we're not worthy, you're not capable, that this isn't real. So that you learn to transcend that and access your authentic higher self and start living that way now, right now, so your
Wow.
life starts to make sense. And I've got an 8-week course that I've built that is working with that, and you can find that on Facebook. So feel free to reach out to me, Facebook, Instagram, and I look forward to connecting and talking with more people.
Yeah, I'm really, really grateful that you spent your time here with myself and the audience. And I look forward to catching up with you soon, brother, and definitely spending some private time sharing some secret sauce. I'll just reach out to you in the future. I don't know. You were pretty busy when I reached out to you, so it's like you always just for the audience. You, if you're patient, you will eventually connect with this incredible man. But
Absolutely.
understand that you do have a schedule, and and that's good. That's more to a point of that's a realization that your mastery is sought after, and you're constantly doing it
Thank you.
all day, every day. I thank you, brother.
Indeed.
So I want to thank you for coming on, and I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Quinn, and I'll see you on the next one, guys.